If you go back, I think in discretes you might have already understood that there are two sets, S1 and S2. And if you have to compare its size, saying that what is the cardinality of S1 and cardinality of S2, and if you can compare. So if cardinality of S1 and S2 are finite, then you can always compare the size, because you can just find the thing, and because you can always compare to finite numbers, right? That's the basic point. But if both sets are infinite, then it's a big challenge, right? Is it or not? So there was this guy Cantor, and that's what he went crazy. If you'll go back and read, so he was very much fond of comparing infinite sets. So, for example, if you take infinite sets n, that's a natural number. Certainly, it's a set of all natural numbers, and the size of set is infinite, although all the elements are of finite length, right? Because every natural number, you say that it's a finite number. And the definition of natural number, if you say the occurrence, it is that you take any finite number, you add 1, you get another natural number. So you take any natural number, you add 1, you get another natural number. And because you are starting from 1, so it will always be a finite number. But it will keep going on. So there is no limit to that. So infiniteness for natural number is in that sense. But when you go to this rational number set, Q. So Q is rational number, R is real number, right? These you might have already known from your class 5th, 4th or something like that. So again, if you say Q, it may be, although the set is infinite, but every number may be a finite or non-finite length. For example, if you take 1 by 3, if you see the length of this in terms of when you are representing it in the decimal place, it is 0.33, and we represent it like this, right? But it can be also 1 by 2, whose value is 0.5. So it may be finite length or infinite length, it depends. Now coming to R, the same thing goes there. R is again of finite length and infinite length. So for example, if you take example of R, extreme towards infinite, it's like pi. If you take root 2, root 3, something like that, right? So these numbers are very strict real numbers, and their lengths are infinite, they don't do repetition and all that. So that is very interesting. There is no repetition substring or something like that. Okay. So what we really get from these? So actually this guy Cantor defined that basically if there is a set S1 which you know, and there is a set S2 which you know, if you are able to establish a bijective, right? So there is something called injective and surjective, basically 1-to-1 correspondence, and the other thing is onto, right? These two different mappings, if you are both of them are present from S1 to S2, or if it is 1-to-1 and onto, it's called bijective mapping, and it is also referred as 1-to-1 correspondence, right? 1-to-1 correspondence means every element here has a unique element here with which it is mapped, and that goes for every. So 1-to-1 is this, that one element here is mapped with one element here, and all to make sure that nothing is left in S2. So therefore you will have exactly same number of elements here as in S2 which you have in S1. So if you are able to establish this bijective mapping between two sets, that declares that size of S1 is equals to size of S2. So to declare a bijective mapping, you have to prove that there exists a function f such that whenever you take x1 from S1, you will have f of x1, and that will be a unique value belonging to S2. And you will not have any extra in S2, for sure. Right? That's what you have to prove. Okay. So on the basis of same thing, one can quickly prove the following. So let's take one simple example. So based on that, actually he gave two things. He said that there is something called countable and uncountable. So countable is something that is either it is a finite set, means the cardinality of the set is a finite number, or it is of the same size as n. If it is of the same size as n, we are still calling it countable, because the size of n, although it is infinite, but you can do the counting 1, 2, 3, 4 and all that. So they said that if it is of the same size, we will still call it countable, because you have a one-to-one correspondence with the natural numbers, and natural numbers are actually indexed, ordered. So you can still do the counting of every element in the other set also, which you are proving to be countable. Right. Now, let's take one very simple example and see. So, let's take set x, right, and this x is actually set of even numbers. Now, when you say set of even numbers, so what you have? This set is actually 2, 4, 6, like this. So basically every element, if you see the indexing where they are present, the function that can map this set from the natural numbers is very simple. You can take the set of natural numbers here, you can take the set x, and if you place it 1, so 1 is mapped with 2, 2 is mapped with 4, 3 is mapped with 6, 4 is mapped with 8, 5 is mapped with 10, and likewise. So what is happening? For every element in the natural number, you have a one-to-one correspondence with an element in this set x also. Right. So the function that does the mapping is simple. Fx is equals to 2x. Now if you take this function that establishes a one-to-one correspondence from n to x, that means it says that the size of n is same as size of x. But it looks very different, right? Because you know that n contains more element than x. N contains, certainly 1 is missing here, 3 is missing here, 5 is missing here, 8, 7 is missing. All the odd numbers are missing from this x, which are present in n. But that's how we deal with infinite. We say that if you are able to establish this thing, you still, as per the contours definition, you're gonna say that the cardinality of x is equals to cardinality of n, and therefore x is countable. As per the definition of contour. Because two infinite sets are of the same size when there is a one-to-one correspondence. Now, this is a simple example. Interesting part is, although if you take the set Q, right, if you take the set Q, which is a rational number which contains even 0.5 and also it contains 1.3 if you take bar, or 0.5 bar, sorry 0.5 bar, I am not sure if that might exist, but 0.3 bar or something like that. Now if you talk about these, the interesting part is how we do find the mapping, correct? And finding the mapping is only possible, that means you have an algorithm to compute. Given a natural number, you will take that natural number as input and you're going to output the corresponding number on the other side. So, what mapping you should be able to get from N to Q? That's the next question. How to establish that? So, it looks different and difficult. It's not as easy as we have done for X. But it is not very difficult. Even though you have real numbers of infinite length, still there is a representation that contains finite values as a representation for those rational numbers. For example, 1.3, if you are seeing, it is 4 by 3. If you are saying 0.3 bar, it is actually 1 by 3. So there is a finite representation of every infinite length, even rational numbers, the corresponding value. So therefore, that's why we say for every rational number, we say that there is a way to write P by Q such that Q is not 0, right? There is a representation of every rational number in the form of P by Q, where P and Q are both natural numbers. That's what helps us to do the indexing. So there are two natural numbers you are using to actually define this set Q. So what we do, we create a matrix, and here this is 1 by 1, first row first column, first row second column, first row third column, first row fourth column, likewise. And this is second row first column, second row second column, second row third column, and likewise. This is third row first column, third row second column, third row third column, and likewise. And this is fourth row first column, right? So in this way, here and here you can have defining the P value and Q value. So P by Q you can represent in this way. Now when you are representing it in this way, the interesting part is if you try to do the indexing based on just row measure or column measure, that will create a problem. Because when you go row measure, it will go up to infinite length, right? You will keep counting and you will never return back to the second row. So that is a problem. So we have to create an indexing such that every number present in this matrix has some index as per the natural number. Index means basically at that particular index you are doing the computation using that index value, and then you are computing that. So there should be some way to count these numbers and give them some indexing, and that's what will prove that, right? When you are doing one-to-one correspondence with natural numbers, it is actually giving them index from starting from 1. Now, how we do that? So definitely going row measure or column measure is a problem. So what we do, we actually do diagonal wise. So we say, okay, this is your number 1. So you get the value as the first. So this is my 1 by 1. Then the second one, what you do, you start like this. So basically you're gonna traverse the diagonals in the diagonal way. So you're gonna take this, then this, and then you're gonna come to this. So layer wise from diagonal side you are moving. So you're gonna take this, then this, and then you're gonna move to the next in the diagonal way. Now the only problem here is this 1 got the first index, 2 is the second index. What is the third value corresponding to 3? It is 1 by 2. What is value corresponding to 4? It is 3 by 1. Now what is value corresponding to 5? Value corresponding to 5 is actually 2 by 2, whose value is 1 by 1 again. So we gonna skip which has already occurred. So we have to really skip those numbers which have already been counted in. So you have to simplify the numbers and see if the P and Q value you have already crossed through or passed through. And if that is the case, you should skip that part. So we're going to skip 2, 2 and we're going to directly go to 1 by 3. What is the value as 6? It will be 4 by 1, and then you will have 3 by, at 7 you will have 3 by 2 and likewise. So in this way you will realize that for every rational number it will occur at some point of time in this list and will have a corresponding index, which will be the corresponding representation from the natural number whose mapping this rational number is. So in this way you can create a mapping that will always, if you enter that index, it will certainly map to the same rational number always, because you have created such a mapping. Right? So what we prove from here, that Q is countable. Okay, let's come to the final and interesting part of real numbers.
Sir, in the previous case, sir, how will we deal with the negative numbers?
Sorry?
The negative rational numbers?
Sorry?
Sir, in the previous case, you told about the mapping of natural numbers to rational numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sir, but rational numbers even include negative rational numbers like minus 1 by 3, minus 1 by 10. So how are we going to deal with those cases?
Negative rational numbers.
So, minus 1 by 2 is a rational number whose value is less than 0, right?
What others would say on this?
We can just map it like we used to do for natural numbers to whole numbers. Natural numbers to integers. Just like we map it alternatively, like alternately, first 1, then minus 1, then 2, minus 2, and so on. We can do that here as well.
But here we're considering the natural number set, right? So why
Yes,
will integers
so
come into it?
1 by 3.
So we can also map two consecutive numbers for the negative of the number consecutively to that
But
with
isn't it a 1 by 1 mapping?
Yes, so it will still be a 1-to-1 mapping. We will just alternate in positive and negative signs.
yes, exactly.
Good. So see what they are trying to say. If let's go back and try to understand from here. If you take the integer number I, right? I is basically what? If you take the line, this I is actually 0. Then you have 1, 2 minus 1. You have 2. So this side you have natural numbers. This is a 0, and this side if you go, it is like you take the natural number and put a minus, right? Now when you want to prove that even I is actually a countable set, what you gonna do? So the way to prove is that you have to take n, you have to take this I here. The first natural number is mapped to 0, second natural number is mapped to 1, third natural number is mapped to minus 1, fourth natural number is mapped to 2, fifth natural number is mapped to minus 2, and likewise. So basically what you are doing, you are going from 0 to 1, then coming to minus 1, then coming to minus 2, then going to minus 2, and likewise. Right? So a similar way, if you are talking about this rational numbers, what you can do? See, minus sign on top or bottom, it doesn't matter. Correct? So basically you can create two copies of this thing. Correct? You can create two copies of this, the same matrix, and then when you are doing this 1 by 1, you can take minus 1 by 1 at the same time. So here when you are doing, even that should be possible, that when you are taking the first as 1 by 1, the second index will be minus 1 by 1. Then you can take this. Yeah, see, altogether you just need a minus sign for in front of everything. So it will be just like doubling the size. right? But when it is infinite and you are creating one-to-one correspondence, that means doesn't count there. You can always establish the one-to-one correspondence in that way.
Sir, and 0?
Sorry?
And 0, sir, we have not counted 0 anywhere.
Where in rational numbers? So see, you understood the technique, right? We are not, basically we are not going in details of that. I think you must understand what the concept is. That you should be able to establish the mapping.
Yes, sir.
If there are some finite numbers, you can always start with those finite numbers that you want to deal with. See, when you wanted to deal with 0 here in integer, what you did? You just gave it a index 1. If you want to deal with some special more finite set of numbers, you can give them the initial index and then start the mapping.
It doesn't really matter much.
Yes, it doesn't really matter much. Right. Altogether, you should be able to make certain that every number which you are talking about here will surely have a mapped index from which you are going to derive. And every time you are going to get the same index if you want to compute that. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, let's come to the real number. So here the most interesting part comes in. The fact is that there does not exist any, right? So there does not exist any mapping that can create one-to-one correspondence between n and r. But how are we going to prove that? To prove that, there is something very interesting you're going to do. You're going to take the contradiction and prove it. So you're going to say that let's say that there exists some mapping f. So what this mapping f is, it is from natural numbers to real numbers. Correct? That's what we're going to do. So when you say that mapping, you're going to take the natural number value and the corresponding real number. So let's say that mapping is f, as we said. So that's how it is going to look like. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we don't know 1 is mapped to what, but as per this mapping it might be some value, right? So you can put any decimal value here. So let's put some values. You can take any and then again still the same proof will work. So let's say I am taking 5.1263 and still going on. It may halt in between or it may not halt. It doesn't matter. But I am assuming that most of the real numbers that I am putting here goes beyond the limit, and many of them are infinite with no repetition. Interesting part is no repetition. That is important. And they are not rational numbers, right? So you cannot represent them in p by q or any other notations, as we have already seen the example pi, root 2, root 3. So let's say this is my value for the 1. For value of 2 it is 0.2134, something like that. Value of 3 is 7.1698, something like that. Value of 4 is 2.367558, something like that. And likewise you have the values. Now let's say this mapping is already existing. So as per the mapping, you're going to get every real number which will have an index. That's what we are saying, right? Our assumption is that. Now I am going to create a interesting real number. Let's see how we create that interesting real number. So I say that you create a new real number r whose value will be as per the following. You take the first digit of the first real number as per the mapping and you change that bit to any other bit. So basically at every place what all values you will have? You will have the values ranging from 0 to 9, right? At every place. I am saying that you create this real number by changing the first bit of the first real number, second bit of the second real number, third bit of the third real number, and likewise. Third bit means third place thing, not bit actually. Third place, fourth place, and likewise. So if you're going to create this, let's say that the value of r is, so at place of 5 you can take this is the first place, so I'm going to take anything. So I take 3. Okay, good. Now decimal. Now after that, the second place that I am seeing, okay, what is the value? It's 2. So I have to take anything other than 2. I took 1. Then 3. I took the value other than 6. I took 7. Let's say 4. It is 7. I took 3. Again, I can take it. That's not a problem. And likewise. Is the construction clear? How we are constructing this number r? We are changing the ith bit of the ith real number here. So we are changing the ith bit and making sure that this real number is not certainly similar to any of the real numbers we have seen so far. So it is differing with the first place from the first, it is differing in second place from the second, it is differing in third place from the third, and likewise. So it differs from all the real numbers that you have seen so far. Correct? Now, as per this real number's existence, because it's a real number, it will have its own existence here somewhere. It will have some index here. Is it or not? Maybe at some place, you don't know, something very way beyond here, it exists. But because this real number is keep going and it is going up to the infinite length, even when it is occurring, it is also flipping its bit with its own rth place. So let's say that it is occurring at some index m, right? Because it is a countable set, you have set a mapping. So certainly this r will have some indexing m, correct? As per your definition. Now it is occurring at this place, this value r. But as per the definition of this r, when you will arrive here, so in the mth place, you will realize that this number is going to differ in mth place from itself. But how is that possible? You are claiming that a number is mapped at this mth index, but then you are also saying that as per the construction rule of this real number, which is not a problem, you can always create such a real number. But this construction rule is saying that this number r, although is indexed at this mth place, is differing from that number at the mth place. So there is a contradiction. And that's what proves that such kind of mapping will never exist. That will prove, see, r differing at mth place to any number is possible, but when you prove that this number is placed at index m, and although it is differing at mth place, this is mth place in the number, this both cannot occur at the same point of time. So that's what, basically we are changing the diagonals in this whole. If you see this in a matrix way, if I place it, we are taking the first place, second place, third place for the third number, fourth place for the fourth number, fifth place for the fifth number, and likewise, you are moving on the diagonals and changing the diagonal values. So you are creating a number which is differing with every number corresponding to the diagonal, and that proves that when you will reach to the index of this number actually, still this number will be differing at the mth place, at the diagonal value. So this number is differing to itself. How is it possible that a real number is not same as it is? That's something illogical we are saying altogether, and that's what is a contradiction. That as per the mapping it should be existing there, but as per the definition of this real number it cannot exist there because it is not same as that number. And that is exactly the contradiction. And because we are using this diagonal, so that's why this method has been popularly known as diagonalization method. Is it clear, or anyone has any doubt in that? Okay. If it's clear, then we're going to jump back to the Turing machines. Okay, before really jumping on to our first problem that we're going to prove to be undecidable, we're going to talk something very interesting. We're going to prove that, let's say that there is a set of Turing machines and there is a set of all the languages. Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, we have said that our mapping is one to one. Like for example, for one natural number corresponding, we have only one real number.
Correct.
But sir, if we can also choose different mappings. Like for example, if for every natural number, I take a set of two real numbers.
No. See, when you say there exists a bijective one-to-one correspondence, that's what you are proving, right? So here the existence that you have taken this is not just a mapping. This is a one-to-one correspondence mapping, bijective mapping that you have taken. That means every real number, right, is an image of some natural number, and there is no real number which is not any image of any other natural number, right? Okay, now with what you are commenting.
Sir, what I'm saying is, what if we like define this mapping? For example, for every natural number, there exists only one and only single set which consists of actually two real numbers.
Okay,
This also we consider it a bijective mapping because it is one to one and on to.
okay.
So sir, for this kind of mapping, our the previous proof fails to like that proof like only does prove that the mapping does not exist for one to one mapping where we are mapping from one natural number to only single real number.
Why? So you are saying that here I am not taking this, but I am taking n and fn in the way that for one you have two real numbers r1 and r2.
Yes, sir.
See, in that case you can always create a tuple here, right? The way you are creating this r, here you can create r and r bar. This r will be differing with r1, this r bar will be differing with r2. And see, the crux of the proof is that this mapping is ensuring some index to any real number, yes or no? Because you say it's a bijective mapping, so it ensures that there is a one-to-one correspondence. That means every real number is an image of some natural number. So there is some index of that real number. I said that okay, you are constructing this real number which is of infinite length, and here what you are constructing, how you are constructing, you are enforcing that this real number is differing at the first place with the first real number as per the index, second place with the second real number, third place with the third real number, and likewise. When you will reach to the index of this real number, what will happen? Can you analyze that? If you are able to see that, you are done with the proof. Certainly there is some index of this real number. When you will reach to that index, what you will realize? The index says that this real number is parked here. But still this r will be differing with that real number also at the mth place, as per the construction. But how these two things can occur at the same time? It is actually violating, right, the universal rule. A number cannot be differing. You are saying two numbers are same, but there is one digit difference. It's not possible. It's a basic violation of mathematics, right? So that's why we arrive at a contradiction that mapping is enforcing that this number is parked somewhere, it got some index, but once you arrive at that index, you realize that this r, what you have constructed, is differing even with that number. So that means that number did not get that index, but your mapping is saying this is the index. So what is it? It's a contradiction altogether. Is it clear? And why this is occurring, the main reason is this infinite bits possible. If each of the real numbers you are limiting only the real numbers of the finite length, then you cannot claim it. See, this all uncountable thing is coming because you are able to create a number which is of infinite length, and you will never be able to park it anywhere or index it anywhere. You will never be able to assign any value in the domain of which it is the image. Okay. Good that you asked. I hope it clarified for few other students. Okay. So now we're going to talk about, let's say that set of all possible Turing machines. And there is a set of all possible languages. Now, set of all possible languages, when you say, so sigma is what? Sigma is alphabet. Sigma star is all possible finite length string. So when you say set of all possible languages, actually you are taking the power set of this. Correct. So anyway, sigma star is of infinite length, the power set of that will be certainly of infinite length. So what we are going to analyze that, if you take this set S1, this set S2, we're going to prove that S1 and S2 are not of the same size. We're going to prove that S1 is countable while S2 is uncountable. How are we going to prove that? We're going to establish a mapping with the natural number here, that there is a one-to-one correspondence with the natural number, while here we're going to prove that there is a one-to-one correspondence with the real number. And we already have seen that n, if you have established the correspondence with the natural number, you are countable, while when it is one-to-one correspondence with R, so R is of uncountable size, and therefore this set will also be uncountable. That means there will be a huge difference between this sizes, and then you can prove that there will be some languages for which you don't have any Turing machine, because if the cardinality of S1 is smaller than cardinality of S2, there is something countable and uncountable size sets. So certainly if you try to establish a mapping between S1 and S2, you will not be able to prove the onto part. There will be elements in S2 which are not image of any from S1, and which will prove that there will be some possible languages for which you don't have any Turing machine. Okay, so we'll come to that part. Let us first prove that S1 is countable. How to prove that S1 is countable? Means set of all possible Turing machines are countable. I think proving that is very easy. For any given sigma, whatever you take, when you take sigma star, what happens? So the sigma star is written in the following way, right? First you have 0 length string, then you have 1 length string, then you have 2 length string, then you have 3 length string, and likewise. And because of this way of writing, you can establish a one-to-one correspondence for any given alpha, for any given sigma, if it is 0, 1, or let's say it's A and B. So what it is going to be as the mapping, if you're talking about n and the corresponding f of n, so it will be at one place you will have empty string, at second place you will have A, at third place you will have B, at fourth place you will have AA, at fifth place you will have AB, at sixth place you will have BA, at seventh place you will have BB, and following, then 3 length strings, then 4 length string. So basically this is, if the cardinality of this, let's say the cardinality of sigma is, let's say, X, then what is going to happen? This will take how much place? This will take x to the power 0, sorry, x to the power 0 numbers will be occurring there, x to the power 1 numbers will be occurring as one length, x to the power 2 many numbers will be occurring here, string, sorry, not numbers, x to the power 1 string, 0 string is occurring here, which is a epsilon, x to the power 1 many strings will be occurring here as of length 1, x to the power 2 length strings will be occurring here, x to the power 3 here, and likewise. But still you are able to establish a mapping that will ensure that every string in sigma star will have some index for sure, because every string in sigma star we have assumed to be of finite length. So there will come a time when you will be dealing with that whatever is the length of the string, if the length of the string is I, so when you will reach to the band x to the power I, in those indexing it will certainly exist. And therefore, based on this mapping you can now say that certainly there is a one-to-one correspondence between natural numbers and sigma star, and therefore sigma star is countable. What do you mean by sigma star is countable? What do we derive from that? See, every Turing machine, if you see the components of every Turing machine, every component is of finite length. So you can represent a Turing machine also in the form of a string. And because every component is of finite length, so when you are converting into any base or any particular string, finally you will have a finite length string. And if you take the alphabets for writing the description of this Turing machine, if you take the sigma star for that alphabet, this Turing machine will be some element part of the sigma star corresponding to that alphabet. So what we get here? We get that every Turing machine is actually an element of sigma star. There might be some other values also which are invalid description of a Turing machine. So ignoring that, but set of all possible Turing machines is actually a subset of sigma star. And therefore, if sigma star is countable, a subset of that cannot be uncountable, right? So therefore, because this S1 is what? S1 is a subset of sigma star, therefore this S1 is certainly what? Is a countable set. Now, you might be confused at a one point, let me just rephrase. See, this sigma might be differing from what the description of Turing machine, but that doesn't matter. You know how to change a string from one base to another base. A string from one alphabet to another alphabet is possible if the alphabets are if the alphabet set is of finite size, right? Here, if you have 0, 1, and here if you have 0 to 9, you already know the mapping, right? So whenever you have a finite length string from 0 to 9, you will have a finite length string when you are representing in the binary also. So representation of the alphabet, if you are changing, that doesn't make a finite length to go infinite. I hope you got what I am trying to convey here. So therefore, whatever the alphabet, if it is of finite length, is still, if you take the sigma star, S1 is subset of that, set of all possible Turing machines. Whether it's a decider, whether it's a recognizer, but it's a Turing machine, so still its definition is all possible Turing machines are actually countable. Now let's talk about set of all possible languages. So how we get set of all possible languages? So let's take sigma star first, and let's take that it is over alphabet 0, 1. So you will have sigma, you will have 0, you will have 1, you will have 0, 0, you will have 1, 0, 1, you will have 1, 0, you will have 1, 1, you will have 0, 0, and likewise, correct? Now let's take, you have taken some language L, right? Now you have taken some language L. What will be that language doing? So let's say that this language L is actually containing 0, it is containing 0, 1, it is containing 0, 1, 1, it is containing 0, 1, 1, 1, and likewise. So all the strings starting with a 0 and followed by only ones. That's a language, right? It's a subset of sigma star. Now when you take this language, I can represent this language. So when you are placing it, so what it is, this language is containing this 0. It is not containing other elements. Then it is containing certainly this 0, 1, and then it is not containing, then it is containing 0, 1, 1, and likewise. So what will happen finally? I can map this language to a infinite length binary string. How? Now, the index, if you see, for every string in sigma star is index. That's why we said it's a countable, right? So if the index I string is not present in the language, the ith bit of that binary will be 0. But if the ith string in sigma star is present in the language, you are going to place 1. So what is going to happen? Because sigma is not here, so it is 0, 0 is occurring there, so it is 1. So the ith place of this binary string that we are creating, again we are creating a binary string B, which is defined as per the following rule. The ith place of that binary string is decided based on if the ith element as per the indexing of sigma star is present in L or not. If it is present, you get 1 at ith place. If it is not present, you get 0. So 1 is not present, you get a 0. 0, 0 is not present, you get a 0. 0, 1 is present, so you get a 1. Then 1, 0 is not present, 1, 1 is not present, then you have 0, 0, 0. It is not present, so you get 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0 for all starting with, sorry, not 4 zeros, you will get 3 zeros. The last 0 will be 1 because this 1 is corresponding to 0, 1, 1. And likewise you will have. I hope you understood the construction here. How we constructed this binary string? If that is clear. So what we have established, that every language L can be converted to a binary string of infinite length. Because this language may be of finite size, but still because you are creating this binary string by comparing it to the sigma star, and the length of sigma star is of infinite. Sorry, the cardinality of sigma star is infinite. Therefore, the binary string corresponding to this definition will be of always infinite length binary string. Now, when you have infinite length binary string for every language, and it will be unique, right? If two languages are differing, so the corresponding, if L1 is not equals to L2, certainly the corresponding B1 will not be equals to B2, right? Because there will be difference in some bit, which based on which they are not same. This particular binary construction, it's called characteristic sequence of a language. So characteristic sequence of a language is a binary string of infinite length, which actually represents what all strings are present in that language and what strings are not present. Now, for every language there will be a unique characteristic sequence, means a corresponding infinite length binary number. So let's take the set B, which contains all possible infinite length binary numbers. So B is what? B is a set of all possible infinite length binary numbers, not finite length. Now this B, if you see, we're going to prove that this B is actually what? Uncountable. Or let's not take B. Let's take B actually containing all these characteristic sequences. So B1, B2 and likewise for every language. So what we have done, we have taken proof that every language we have a unique binary sequence of infinite length, and if you take all such binary sequences, you're gonna get a set of infinite length binary. Now what can you comment about that set B, which is actually containing all those binary sequences? Is it countable or uncountable?
Sir, can you just explain again how are we constructing the binary string?
See, the sigma star, every string has a unique place to occur. Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, that means there is an index for every string, and we have already proved that because it is one-to-one correspondence with the natural number, so there is an index assigned to every string. Correct? Now, construction. So, given a language, some strings from sigma star are there, some strings are not present there.
Yes.
Now, the strings which are present, for that index you gonna write 0 at that place. So for example, if the first string is present, you gonna place 1, otherwise 0. The second string is present, you gonna place 1, otherwise 0, and likewise. Because sigma star is of infinite cardinality, the length of the binary, this string will be also infinite.
Yes.
And this binary construction for every language will be unique, because two different languages cannot have the same binary sequence.
Yes, sir, I got it.
So now when you take all possible such binary sequences of infinite length, what can you comment about that set B? Is it countable or uncountable? The answer is it is uncountable for sure. And you can prove it again using the same technique that you have used for the real numbers. You can prove that when you take this, assume that the indexing is there, so you can always construct a new binary number which will be differing at the ith place with all other binary numbers. And it will also be differing at the indexed place. And therefore, this set B is uncountable. When you prove that this set B is uncountable, what can you say about set of all languages? Because set of all languages, you have created a one-to-one correspondence with B. So therefore, set of all possible languages are also uncountable. And that's why this S2 that you have created there is uncountable. So S1 we have proved because it was a subset of sigma star, and therefore it is countable, while S2 actually got one-to-one correspondence with B, set of infinite length binary strings, and therefore that is a uncountable set. So S2 is also uncountable. And therefore, S1's cardinality is lesser than S2, and you proved that set of all possible Turing machines is of a smaller size than the set of all possible languages, and it proves that there will be some Turing machine, always there will be some languages for which you cannot even design a Turing machine. Forget about the recognizer, you cannot design that. So there will be some languages which are not even Turing recognizable. So far, whatever the languages we were seeing, we always used to say These are Turing recognizable. But in reality, there are Turing languages for which you don't have even a recognizer. And we will encounter such languages very soon. So it is just to prove that actually the set is much larger for the possible languages. And every set of all possible language, right? Remember, every formal language is representing a problem in the universe. That means there are more problems than algorithms. Actually, the actual concept that you can derive here, every formal language is representing a set membership problem, right? But the possible algorithm that you can write is represented by the Turing machines. So this is the foundation of the computer science. Actually, you can say that we have more problems than whatever can exist, the number of algorithms. And therefore, always there will exist some problems which we cannot solve using algorithms. That's a big fact you should always remember. Okay, let's try to move forward and prove our first undecidable problem. So let us take this ATM. So ATM is actually tuple of a Turing machine and a string such that M is a Turing machine and M accepts W. Right. So we're going to prove that. What we're going to prove? ATM is undecidable. Now when you say ATM is undecidable, again we're going to prove is using the contradiction. See, this concept that we're going to discuss now is the founding concept for this whole course. Because this, if you understand this, you will be able to follow what we were building so far and what we're going to follow in upcoming. Because this will be the first problem that is being proven to undecidable, and after that we're going to really quickly encounter so many undecidable problems, and the proofs will be based on this particular proof. So listen very carefully. You want to prove that it is undecidable, but how we're going to prove? We're going to prove by contradiction. So when you take the contradiction, what you're going to assume that, let's say that ATM is decidable. When you say ATM is decidable, what does it infer? It infers that there exists a decider. What do you mean by decider? We say that this decider is H. So H is a decider for this ATM. Right. If this H is a decider for ATM, what does it mean? When you're going to pass in the input MW, it is going to say accept or reject. When it says accept, what does it mean? It means M accepts W, and when it says reject, it means M rejects W. Correct? Is it clear? The decider H, because it is a decider for ATM, means it accepts a tuple or it rejects a tuple. When it accepts a tuple, MW, it means M is a Turing machine and M accepts W, right? So it goes here. But when it doesn't accept a tuple and rejects it, this decider, so that means M is rejecting W. Is it clear? So at place of reject, let's write something that M does not accept W. Okay. So I think the definition of H is clear, because H is a decider and we have assumed the existence of H. Now, let us actually create a new decider based on H. So what we are doing, let me go to another page. So the definition of H is very clear. You give input M and W and it says accept or reject. Accept means M accepts W, reject means M does not accept W. Now, I am going to build a bigger machine D which uses this H inside it as a component. So, the input to D is description of a machine, right. So, we are giving a description of a machine as an input, and then what you are doing? Inside D, you are converting this using this small converter. Basically, that's again a Turing machine. You are converting this M in this form, M right. So, you are passing in a Turing machine and its own description to H. So, this is my H. So, what you are doing inside D, you are taking some machine, Turing machine as input, and you are passing the description of that Turing machine in itself. It's like every description is a string, so you are passing description of a Turing machine to itself. You are feeding the description of Turing machine to itself. It is not something very odd. It's like, you might know, if there is a compiler written in a language and then you are compiling the compiler itself. So it's like that compiler is a machine that you have created. Now it's compiling its own definition, right? So it's nothing very odd we are doing here. So what we are doing, we are passing a Turing machine as a input to D, and this Turing machine is passing its own description in itself, and then this M and string form of M is being passed in H. Now H will do what? H is a decider. What it will say? Either accept or it will say reject. Correct? Wait a second. So this H will say either accept or H will say reject. When it says accept, what does it mean? M accepts M, right? Yes or no? When H is saying accept, that means this M is accepting its own description. So it is when H is saying accept, D is going to say R, reject. And when H is saying reject, means M is not accepting M, your D is saying accept. So if you try to see what this R means, it says that actually M doesn't accept M, and A says M accept sorry. This reject means M is actually accepting, right? Here in the background, M has accepted. So whenever M is accepting M, you are rejecting on machine D. But if M is not accepting, you are accepting on D. So H was very much clear when it was, you are passing a Turing machine and a string, it was accepting, so it was saying accept. If the Turing machine is not accepting, you are saying reject. Now this M, when you pass a Turing machine, this D was feeding the definition of the Turing machine or specification to its own, the same machine. So what is happening, if you are passing it to H, either the machine is going to accept its own description or it is going to reject its own description. Correct? Now, if it accepts, your machine D is rejecting, that means D is rejecting when M accepts its own description, and D is accepting when M does not accept its own description. That is how we have designed D. So remember, we have assumed that there exists some H, because that's what is your assumption, that ATM is decidable. And based on that, you are able to construct a machine D which is also a decider, which decides something. And what it decides, that if you give as input a Turing machine, it says whether M accepts its own description or not. The question is, what happens when we pass D to D itself? When you gonna see, you're gonna pass in D here, what it is going to do? When you pass in D, it will go inside, and what will happen? As per this, it will be converted into this D, correct? That D and D. Now, when it goes to H, H is going to say accept or reject, and based on that, you're gonna get something here. When H accepts this description, what does it mean? This acceptance here means, remember, when H is saying accept, that means whatever you have passed in this string, it is accepted on the corresponding Turing machine. That means this D accepts D. And when you say reject, what does it mean? It says D doesn't accept D. Correct? But what this D actually does, it flips the decision of the decider H. So when it says accept, this D finally says reject. And this reject at this place, what does it mean? When you passed in M, it was saying M accepts M. So it means that when you pass the definition of D, it is saying D doesn't accept D. And similarly, here it says D doesn't accept D. Sorry, if D here is being accepted, what does it mean? It means that D accepts D. Because here acceptance means this. So I think we are very close to our timing, right? So you can go back and try to read that. The main thing is, if you try to see, we'll again start from the same point, but the main thing is, I think what we mentioned here is correct. Yeah, sorry. So D, when you are rejecting D, it is accepted here, and when you are rejecting it, it says that D accepts D. So you will realize that actually what is happening here, when the decider says D accepts D, D does not accept D because D is rejecting. The final decision of D is what? Reject. What does it mean? D does not accept D. While when you inserted D, the final decision is accept, that means D accepts D. Correct? While the decider is saying D does not accept D, D itself is saying D accepts D. Here the decider is saying D accepts D, while the D itself is saying D does not accept D. So this decider is saying something else, while the definition of D, how you have defined, is saying something else, which is a contradiction. And which will contradict that this existence of this decider itself is not true. Therefore, you can never have a decider. And this concept is coming from the same principle of diagonalization. So, you should go back and try to read this proof, and also there is a representation of how diagonalization is really being used here. We will have a very brief review of this and then we'll move ahead. So the main crux is that here again we say that there exists a similar, like we were saying there exists a mapping. We said there exists a decider. Now we are using that decider to decide what D is going to behave on itself, its own definition. Decider says something, but the definition of D is done in a way that it always flips the decision of the decider. So when the decider is saying accept, that means D accepts its own description. Because you are flipping the decision, the final decision that is coming out, because the input was description of D to itself, here the reject, it is going to be rejected, and the reject means D does not accept D, while the decider is saying D accept D. So a single decision cannot be both possible. The D is saying I am rejecting my own description, while the decider is saying no, D is accepting its own description. While if it would have been on this other side, that D is rejecting its own description, because again the construction of D, the decider is saying D does not accept its own description, but because decider has said no, the D accepts it. And when D accepts what? Because you have just passed in its own description to the machine, D is accepting its own description. And that's what this whole confusion is actually giving a contradictory feeling. That how can D accept and does not accept its own description at the same time? Decider should be knowing all, right? Decider is like oracle. You have assumed it exists. But it is not doing that. Whatever decider is saying, in reality D is doing opposite of that. But how can then D exist? Either D cannot exist or the decider cannot exist. If decider exists, D can always exist, because you are building this D based on that decider only. So if you want to say that the decider cannot exist, this D, then you have to prove that H cannot exist. And that's why if H is not going to exist, then your this ATM is decidable is not true, and therefore ATM is undecidable. So we'll have a quick review in the next class and then we'll move.